Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're continuing on with our discussion on language and just some key terms and ideas that deal with language, and we'll look a little bit at the different language families we have in our world today also. So last time we were together we were looking at kind of the importance of language, whether it be the written or the verbal expression of language, and just how language can spread and change over time. Some other terms that are related to the spread of languages. First one we have here is what's called language replacement. Now this again is very similar to cultural diffusion, and is pretty much what happens when groups of people meet each other or move into a direction where they come into contact with each other. So we find a situation in which two languages may come into contact with each other, and then just like we saw with culture and acculturation, the stronger language is going to overtake the weaker language. So people are going to be taking on the language of another group that moves into their area. And historically what we've seen, this typically happens, is some sort of a political or physical dominance of one group over another. Whether we're talking about when the Europeans colonized colonized North America, South America, Africa, and in their different colonies they began making the native people speak their language, whether we're talking about when slaves were brought over to the Americas, and the English and would not allow the Africans to speak their native language for fear that they might be trying to create revolt, those types of things. So when these languages come in contact with each other, you have this language replacement. Now, when you have language replacement, most of the time the person still holds on to their older, more traditional, or their native language. It's just that they'll probably be using the other. Otherwise, there might be some sort of consequence or ramification for that. Now, in today's world, and this is where people this is where some people get upset in terms of pop culture and the spread of pop culture and Western culture, is that English seems to be taking over a lot of the languages in our world today because of English as a lingua franca, which we'll talk about lingua francas later, an economic lingua franca, an educational lingua franca, and a political lingua franca across the world. And so some people are, because they feel like English in Western culture in general is so pervasive in their lives, and some people react hostily to that, and so it creates some angst in our world today because of the way that English and Western culture has kind of moved across the landscape. Now, of course, a more complete form of language replacement would be language extinction, and we're actually seeing we've seen over time a relatively rapid extinction of several languages over the years, because really, as globalization happens and as people are trying to communicate with each other, and as Europeans and other peoples dominated the global landscape, there's no longer a use to speak certain languages, and fewer and fewer people kept speaking particular languages, and so it's really of no benefit. Someone continues to speak a language that not many people speak. It's really no benefit to learn that language that nobody speaks, because you're not able to communicate with each other or with anybody else. And so, in some ways, the coming together of a lot of these languages and adopting some either a lingua franca or adopting specific languages that people will speak instead of maybe native languages or tribal languages has been to the benefit, because people are able to communicate more effectively and more efficiently. But again, it creates conflict, it creates angst between people groups, because they feel like it is an affront to their tradition, it is an affront to who they are as a people. And some people really lament this as kind of it creates a homogenous cultural landscape, and so people are really concerned about those types of things. Now, when we look at languages and we want to try to find out if languages are related to each other, it's kind of interesting. You can do what's called reverse reconstruction, and basically what we do with reverse reconstruction is we can look at specifically where do words come from, and we find two languages that have a similar word that has a similar meaning. We can assume that they diffuse from a similar location. So even if you have two separate languages, but if they have two words that are the same, that seem similar and also represent a similar idea, you can assume that they diffuse from a similar location. So this is what's called reverse reconstruction. So we can go back historically and look geographically at where languages come from, where people came from, and maybe the words they had came from. Now, just a simple, kind of a simple example or explanation of this is, as you've been studying, as you've been reading, you should find out that English is a Germanic language, which comes from the Indo-European language family, and there are some words in our English language that come directly from German. That should be pretty easy to identify. So if you look at a couple of words, we have, I'll go ahead and spell them out here. We have the word Hund. Getting a lot better at drawing these things. We have the word Hund. We have the word Mutter. And we have the word kindergarten. Oops. That one doesn't look too great, does it? Should have typed it. Oh well. Okay. All three of these are Germanic words that have come directly into our English language. Now, some of them we don't use. At least one of them we don't really use a whole lot anymore. Like this first one, Hund. Even though you don't speak German, you hear that word Hund, it might sound familiar. That's because Hund in English is hound, which of course is used to represent dog. And again, that comes directly from German, and so you can see the relationship there. Mutter is German for mother, and so again, it's pretty much a direct translation. It means exactly the same thing. It looks similar, sounds similar, all those types of things. And then here's a word that came directly over. We have what's called kindergarten. It means kinder, child, garten is garden, and we just continue to use the word. We don't think of it as child garden. We think of it as kindergarten. It's where children are in the 5 years old, is where they're kind of their primary school, those types of things. And so where that's come directly over from German, and we really haven't even translated. And so again, we know that English comes from German. Here are some words that in our language that are directly translated in English we've borrowed from, and kind of proves that particular point, kind of our heritage and our roots, and those types of things. So that would be an exercise of reverse reconstruction. In our world today, if we look at the different language families, and I've looked at different sources and things, I've seen where we either have 19 or 20 different language families. I don't necessarily think that you knowing 19 or 20 different language families is all that important. You do need to know a couple of important ones, and the most important one you need to know is what's called the Indo-European language family. The Indo-European language family is the most widely spoken language family in our world today, and it is the family of many languages that, obviously, if it's the most widely spoken, is the family of many languages that you're probably familiar with. Obviously, English. It's also the family of most European languages, Slavic languages, which are in Eastern Europe, Farsi, which is spoken in Iran, and also Hindi. And this is just a couple of examples. We could go back to our previous map and look at the geography of the Indo-European languages, but again, it is most widely spoken. Now, the interesting thing about this is that because we know that these are all part of the Indo-European language, we can assume that we know that our language has common roots. And so, if we look back far enough, we know that our experiences and our cultures and our identities, come from a common location. So, some people use this to kind of reiterate the fact that maybe we're not necessarily as different as we all think that we are. And so here's a map. This is not, for whatever reason, this is labeled World Language Family. This is actually some of the different language branches that we see around the world. And so you can see the map is colored. You see all the language branches down here is your key. Now, one of the things that people are concerned about is the way that some of these language branches are disappearing, and that there are fewer and fewer in colors on this map. Especially if you look at the continent of Africa, you look at Brazil and the rainforest, in southern Southeast Asia, where some of these tribal languages would be spoken. There's some concerns that those will be stamped out again. A lot of people are concerned about preserving culture, and what we should have learned about early in the year is that not only is globalization causing the wider spread of some cultural identities, but it's also helping people preserve the culture, because we can locate the things and use our technology and we'll preserve that, and help people maybe who've been a part of that but are widespread to come back together and unite around some of those common cultural identities. I think this map is relatively helpful because it helps us to see kind of graphically, and if you can think geographically in your mind, the spread of what is considered the Proto-Indo-European language family, the very first people who spoke the Indo-European language. You see it breaks off into these different language branches, and then you can see it specifically breaks off into some of these different language groups, and then the specific languages themselves. I always like to point out English, and because we speak English in America in our classrooms, and so Indo-European family to the Germanic language branch, and then you have the West Germanic language group, which then comes over here to this Anglo-Frisian, which splits down into Old English, and then you enter in the French when the French come, and they take over the island of England, and you have this mixture of Middle English, and then today you're going to get the modern English. And so you can see where that comes from. But again, you take any of these languages, whether it's you're looking at Farsi or if you're looking at Hindi, you can kind of see historically where it came from, and also think the diffusion of language and geographically how it spreads across the landscape. So that's all we're going to talk about today. Thank you for watching, and next time what we're going to do is we're going to look at two theories on the way that the Indo-European language family spread, and that's what we have what's called the conquest theory and the agriculture theory.